So welcome everyone to the SAGES HPB Career Development webinar, streaming live on Facebook Live right now. So I'm Daniel Nelson. I'm a surgical oncologist at William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso, Texas, and associate professor of surgery at Uniformed Services University. Just some special thanks and appreciations that I'd like to go through. So first, I'd like to thank the HPB Solid Organ Committee from SAGES for allowing us to put on this webinar and assigning me with this moderation task. Particularly, I want to thank Dr. Al-Saidi, our committee chair, as well as our co-chairs, Dr. Jaya Raja, Dr. Seppa, Dr. Hogue, and Dr. El Hayek, who's a part of our panel today. I'd also like to thank Ms. Mulugeta and Mr. Rosado, who assisted with me with setting up the SAGES webinar and allowing us to be able to stream it on Facebook, which we couldn't have done without the SAGES Facebook task force. And then finally, I want to extend my appreciation to all of our panelists today for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us and share some of their insights on professional development for HPB surgeons. Our first talk is with Dr. Erin Baker. And unfortunately, Dr. Baker couldn't join us today. She was kind enough to put together a video for us, which I'll play here. But first, just to introduce her, Dr. Baker is a graduate from Georgetown University School of Medicine in 2008. She completed general surgery residency and then an HPB fellowship at the Carolina Medical Center. She is currently an associate professor of surgery with Atrium Health, and she's the program director for the HPB Surgery Fellowship Program, as well as the associate program director for the general surgery residency program. She's also the medical director for the Moorhead Medical Plaza HPB Surgery Clinic. Her interests include minimally invasive HPB surgery, pancreatic cystic neoplasms, and surgical education. And she put together an absolutely phenomenal talk on finding a job and thriving as a junior faculty. And so we will start her talk now.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to present today. I'm Erin Baker. I'm an associate professor of surgery at Carolinas Medical Center, which is part of the Atrium Health Network. I do want to say thank you to Dr. Nelson for inviting me and the SAGES team. I can't be here in person and be live with you all because I'm hopefully in Hawaii. I had a previously scheduled trip, and if I'm not in Hawaii, then obviously I'll be very sad and may be able to join you online. But I was asked to talk about finding a job and thriving as junior faculty, and I have no relevant disclosures. So what we're going to discuss today is, when do you start looking for a job? What are the types of resources available? Are there unadvertised jobs out there? And what are the qualities that are sought after for a new hire? And then we'll go a little bit into the thriving piece. So before you start looking for a job, I think it's really important that you sit down and you make a list, either with yourself, your spouse, or your significant other, and you need to come up with those items that are non-negotiable, meaning, do you need to be in a certain area of the country? Is there a specific job practice that you are looking for? And then think about what are the items that are negotiable, but you need to kind of have this inventory and list of priorities when you're looking for a position so that you guys are on the same page together. So what are the things to consider? Well, obviously for the job itself, the location, what is the call frequency, what is the call type? If you are not willing to take trauma call, then you shouldn't look at a job that is going to require trauma call. What are the opportunities for mentorship, either from other partners? Are there roles for education or research? You should think about what you're expecting for compensation. Obviously, this is a little bit beyond our scope of this talk today, but you have spent a lot of time training, educating yourself, and you should know what you're worth, and you should be able to be prepared to understand different compensation models. And you should think about the potential for future growth, meaning, is this a job that will have opportunities for growth in the future? And ultimately what it comes down to is, what do you want your life to be like? And as you're thinking about things, you need to envision this and make sure you're choosing a job that is pertinent to that. So before looking at a job, there's a couple of things to consider. Now, these facts predominantly come from the business world, but I think you should think about them as well, is that the vast majority of jobs are found through networking, not online. And I would say that that's definitely true for surgery. 75% of resumes are rejected before reaching the hiring manager. I don't know if that's so much true in surgery, because a lot of times your resume doesn't have a lot because they know who you are and what you're about anyways. In surgery, I think it is important that we utilize social networking connections, and LinkedIn has become increasingly popular. Now, I'm not the best social media person in the world, but I do have a LinkedIn profile. I also have a Doximity profile. I think that you should at least establish those, because there are definitely lots of job offers that I see that come through on LinkedIn, not offers, but advertisements. And I think that that is definitely a way to try to connect with other people or with other healthcare systems that may be looking for a new position. Doximity, I think, is useful as well. I've not used that as much for networking in terms of jobs. I mainly check in on my classmates from medical school and see what they're doing now. But I do know that people have kind of used those tools to try to connect for different possibilities. But one thing I would say that's very important is you need to take a good look at your social media profiles and just make sure that they are reflective of who you are as a person, what you're trying to convey. It's important that you have a well-written CV. And most of the time, we've all developed CVs through the various points that we've been applying for medical school and residency and fellowship, but your CV should reflect what you're applying for, and it should be read either by a medical editor or someone to kind of offer and correct points. So when do I start looking for a job? Now, and in most cases, yesterday. And really what it is that even if you are a chief resident, even if you're at the beginning of a 2-year fellowship program, you should always be looking for a job, because there are job opportunities that exist everywhere. And it might be that you talk to this person at a course that you went to as a 4th-year resident, and that person that you spoke to at that course may be able to connect you or offer you a job when you're finally ready to start out into practice. And so always looking ahead of time is really important and gives you the additional time of added headway towards the job hunt. So are there unadvertised jobs? Yes, and they do exist. And how do I find them? The predominant way that we find them is through word of mouth. And the way that we can figure out about these types of jobs is to have your mentors or your department chair call and ask. And so the reason why I know this is because most surgeons are required to give between 90 and 120 days notice if they are planning on leaving a position. In the academic world, it's actually really common to move around every couple of years with a job. And so if there's that much notice, as soon as notice is given, it's not that the person has actually left and gone to their other institution, but that is when the organization or the university is going to start looking to hire to fill that job before the person who's leaving has ever even left. So we know way in advance if a surgeon is going to be leaving and an opportunity is going to open up. And so those types of unadvertised jobs do exist even before the job has gotten out there. I will say that there's something to be said for cold calling or cold emailing. Send out your CV, paper the town, and you can just get a list of different departments or organizations and just send them your email that has a letter of interest and a copy of your CV, because there's nothing that's going to come from it that would hurt you. And I think that that could definitely be a way. I think that going to society specialty meetings can be very important, because this is a fantastic opportunity to network. And for those of you who might be more introverted people, sometimes that can be a little hard of having to get out there, but really this kind of interactions, even in a social setting at a surgical society meeting, can help you to connect with people to try to get a new job. So, sit in the bar or talk to the speakers afterwards and ask follow-up questions, strike up a conversation, because that conversation that you have might be able to lead you to the connection of how you can find a different job or a job that might be becoming available in a new place. So there are job boards for the different societies, and they do publish, these are obviously advertised jobs. And they can be very useful. So I took snapshots of all the job boards from different societies. So most of these, you don't have to be a member of the society in order to access the job board. So I would encourage you to check them out. So here's SAGES. They've got lots of different jobs available, from both endoscopic procedures as well as surgical procedures. Here's the AHPBA. A lot of times I will find that sometimes there is redundant information on job boards. So this job that's being offered in Portland is the same one that was also seen on the SSO website. But they're not always overlapping. And so I would encourage you to try to check them all out if you can. I do actually get alerts when new jobs are posted to the job boards as well. So I'm always kind of checking it out to find out what's being opened and advertised out there. And you can refer back to them frequently, because they'll provide you with information as to how to send your letter of intent or recommendation, or sorry, letter of interest, as well as your CV. So I did want to talk a little bit about physician recruiters, and this was a great article that I read on the Kevin MD blog that talks about both the benefits and the detriments of physician recruiters. I have not personally ever worked with a physician recruiter, but I've had some friends who've had experiences with them. So there are some benefits. So they can give you honest feedback about your candidacy for a position. If they are seeing all the different candidates that are coming through, they can give you insight into job availability and what the expectations are. But most importantly, I think recruiters will know the area that you might be applying for a job in. And so they can kind of help to gauge the dynamics and the competition in an area that you might be looking, particularly if it's in a major metropolitan area. They can provide you with objective data regarding a patient population or a competing group. However, recruiters don't necessarily work for you, right? They might be working for themselves or for a hospital. And so they may be more interested in making a commission as opposed to really helping you to find the job that is right for you and your career and your family. And they can't assess physician work-life balance, right? That's only something that you can assess. So they don't know if you taking call every third night is actually a terrible thing or if it's an okay thing. They might not be the best at judging if a work environment is going to be a bad workplace or if there are unfair physician arrangements. So there is some caution to be had from physician recruiters, although they might be able to connect you with lots of different job opportunities. So that's, I think, is one advantage. So something just to bear in mind. It's really important that you establish good connection with your faculty, particularly your senior faculty, because most of the time, senior faculty members will have connections all over the country or all over North America that can help you to look for and establish opportunities to seek a new job. And so it's very important that you have a good connection with them and talk with them and be honest with them about what it is that you're looking for, because they can help you to find a new position. And it's important that you talk with a faculty member to say, can you provide me with a good reference? Because the last thing you want is to have a faculty member who is talking to someone that you're hoping to get hired from provide you with a not positive reference. They will be asked to provide references for you that are both written and verbal. Usually the written references don't come until someone has actually already been hired. But that's just something to kind of bear in mind, is that the verbal references usually come when you're still in the deciding phase, right? Where maybe a recruiter or a chair of a department is calling and asking about your skills and what you're capable of. But the written references come after you've already made the decision to be hired. Meetings, I think, are important. Society-specific meetings can be very good, but general meetings can actually be really good too. So American College of Surgeons is many times where you're going to get a broader range of different types of surgeons. So you might have more chairs of departments or heads of divisions that would attend a broad meeting like the American College of Surgeons. And these are some snapshots of actually networking opportunities at some of the meetings. So for instance, I always encourage my fellows when they go to ACS to go to this chapter speed networking. So like, for instance, we have the North Carolina, South Carolina chapter. And so you can sit and do kind of a speed networking engagement where you might meet people from all different kinds of hospitals. And if they're looking to hire someone and you offer the skills that they need, that would be a great way to hear about new job opportunities. This is a snapshot from SAGES from 2019. I had to exclude looking at the 2020 programs because a lot of these meetings were virtual and they didn't hold as many networking ideas. But every single one of these major meetings does offer networking, and you should try to go and show up for those. So what are the qualities that are sought after for a new hire? Well, obviously they want to know what your skill set is, and they want to know what your level of independence is with that skill set. So if you're fresh out of training, you might not be as independent as someone who's been in practice for 5 or 10 years. They might have a niche role that needs to be fulfilled. Like for instance, they may need to hire someone who is going to be the medical student clerkship director. And if that's you, and if you have that quality and skill set, then that might be something you want to do. You need to have the right personality and be able to work well with others. And it's going to be a little bit different depending on the environment that you're looking at. If you're looking at a specific academic program, then they might have expectations as to the research that you're going to do, how that research will be funded, and what your education responsibilities are going to be. Now, a hospital system might want you to come with a very specific skill set or to start a specific program, like we want you to have an MIS hepatectomy program, or we want you to do hepatic artery infusions, or we would like you to start an islet cell transplant program. So if you don't have those skill sets, or you don't think that you're capable of obtaining them, then you need to make sure that you are open and honest about that. Maybe it's a clinical program. Maybe they want you to talk about developing multidisciplinary clinics for management of chronic pancreatitis or pancreatic cysts or something like that. So there are lots of different qualities that they might look at, but a lot of them could be related to specific skill sets, research, education, and clinical programs. All right, so let's talk about how to thrive. And I'm running out of time, so I might have to just go through this quickly, but it's all about balance. And I've borrowed these slides from Dr. Tabrizian, who gave a fantastic talk on this several months back. So you need to find balance in how you're caring for your patients, how you're accomplishing your education and research aspects, and then obviously with your life, you need to create that work-life balance. And ultimately, sometimes less is more, right? You need to provide a greater impact in the areas that you are good. And you can do lots of things, but you might not be able to do everything. So you might not be able to teach all the medical students and have, set up a lab that is funded and be a clinical surgeon. And ultimately, you're going to have to reprioritize. And this is going to happen on a regular basis. Your definition of how we can define what our successes are going to be is going to change over time. And be patient with yourself. It takes time to develop into these things. You're not going to be the chair of the department overnight. So you need to change and adapt your career to meet the needs. And ultimately, what it comes down to is you're going to have to be a good surgeon. You need to focus on having good outcomes. You need to push your boundaries when it's appropriate, as long as you've prepared well and you have support. Do all of these things like contacting referring providers, build your relationships with your colleagues and the people that you need to help you out. You need to be thorough in your workup and prompt in your response and your evaluation, and have courage. Be willing to accept feedback. We're going to get lots of feedback in terms of how we're doing our job and if we're doing it well. And then the last thing is you can develop a niche, and you might say, I am the world expert on whatever. And if that's true, then you can do it. When I started, I developed a program on pancreatic cystic neoplasms. I had to set up a multidisciplinary clinic. I had to write guidelines for our institution and publish those guidelines. I had to make up patient materials and all different kinds of things. And so you can declare interest in something and then try to work on accomplishing that, seeing that through. So, with that, I'm a little bit over time, and I'm going to go ahead and pause. And I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Here's a picture of my family, without whom, I would be nowhere, and I really appreciate them. This is our beautiful city of Charlotte and Carolinas Medical Center, so please come and see us. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. I really appreciate it.
So that was a wonderful talk, and I sure appreciate Dr. Baker taking the time to do that for us. It's too bad that she couldn't be with us. Obviously, if questions come up from any viewers, please feel free to put them in the comment section of the live stream on Facebook, and we'll try to address those as they come up. Our next speaker is Dr. Subhashini Alu, who earned her medical degree and completed her surgical residency at the Chicago Medical School, Rosalind Franklin University Health System. She completed her first fellowship in minimally invasive surgery at SUNY Upstate Medical University in 2005, and a second fellowship in liver transplantation and hepatic pancreatobiliary surgery at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia in 2013. She is section chief of HBB surgery now at Brown University. Dr. Ayloo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. And I would like to thank the HBB Solid Organ Committee for inviting to give this talk. The task that I was assigned is to talk about what are you worth and negotiating an alignment of mission and vision. It's a very important topic, especially when somebody is looking for a job. I have no disclosures, and the objectives of this talk is going to be 5 things. One is focus, what's the focus of a contract negotiation? What are the factors for assessing one's worth? What are some of the common pitfalls of contract negotiation by new faculty? And this could very well be everybody, to be quite honest with you. And resources for identifying fair compensation and what's the appropriate level when one should negotiate. Since we're talking about aligning our mission and vision, I want to start out with the definition of what they mean. I think we have a vague idea, but I really want to hone in on this. Mission is a pre-established, often self-imposed objective or purpose. What are we here to do? That is what mission is. And some of the mission statements from some of the well-known companies is I just listed to get an idea. For example, everybody knows TED Talks, and their mission is spread ideas, which they do very well. So is Microsoft and Google. So these are, again, I'm not biased to any surgical department. I don't have any favoritism. I just picked up a few of the mission statements randomly. So if you look at the first one, to provide the highest quality patient care to all people through innovation, research, and training the next generation. So these are some of the surgical department mission statement. Well, these are the department mission statement. I think if one is looking for a job, it's important to have individual mission. That's how you know what your mission is, so you can align it with the department's mission. On contrary, vision is something you are envisioning what your future is going to be. This is like you want to create or conceive, or you want to look forward to in future what your mission is going to look like. So for example, Microsoft, when they started out, their mission statement was a computer on every desk and in every home. Oh boy, did they achieve that. And so is this surgical department vision statement. Again, I did not pick any university, it's just randomly I picked some. Look at the first one, to be a nation's leading public academic department of surgery, okay? And you should have one too. That's the only way you can align what your mission and vision is with the department, or, depending on which level you're recruiting, sometimes it's institution, university level that you can align with. So what should be the focus of a contract negotiation? If I kind of have to simplify it in 2 words, it is what is your role is going to be, or your responsibilities, versus how it's compensated. Now, compensation comes in different forms, but bottom line is what you're being recruited to do and what they are willing to compensate. So that means you have to understand what they are recruiting a person for. So it's important, it's paramount important when you are applying for a job to understand why you're being recruited and what's your role going to be and what your responsibilities are going to be. Because being just a simple faculty is different from when you're being recruited to create a program, or if the program already exists, and either you're developing the program to a next level, or maybe the program fell behind and you're coming over to turn around the program, then it's a lot of different things that goes in there. Very different, they're not same. So, and you have to understand what are the resources, resources that they are willing to invest at the time of your recruitment in order to achieve that. So if you look at your role and responsibility and the resources that are given, and you think the task could be accomplished, then the next question is, are you interested in the procedure, in the position? The reason I say that is, even if a place gives you all the resources and you think you are capable of accomplishing it, there's personal factors that goes in, like the previous speaker has mentioned. And if even those aligns, then, if you're interested, the next thing you should do is negotiate. When to negotiate? Well, the golden period is at the time of your recruitment, because if you don't get it then, it's very high, very low. It's unusual to get, all the resources that you want later on. It's during the time of recruitment is the best period that you should be requesting all the things that you need in order to achieve the task that you are being asked to take on. So one of the things you have to do is, when at the time of recruitment, you should have a realistic plan to achieve the goals. Is this a realistic plan that you're going there to accomplish? And do you have all the resources, or are they willing to give it to you, even if they don't have it at the time of recruitment? And what's the timeline that you are being recruited to develop all those things? These three things, it should be very clear in your mind at the time of recruitment. Then the next question comes, what are you worth? Well, what we are talking about here is professional value, not worth as a human. Nobody can put a price on that. But what we are talking about is, what are you professionally valued at? And the compensation at the end of the day is going to all come to financial, whether it is, call or, materialistic thing, personal support. They all bottom line add up to what it is financially worth. So it all depends on what your work worth. Unfortunately, there is no simple equation to kind of come up with, what is the worthiness of somebody's work is. It's a complex equation. You have to look at your assets. That could be knowledge, skills, your past accomplishments, your talents, intelligence, how driven and passionate are you in working on that project, your reputation and name recognition. And then all that need to be equated to, in some way or the other, to economics, which is, bottom line is money. Because even if the resources is recruiting support personnel, at the end of the day, they will look for, how much are they going to cost? So it's not a simple equation. It's a little bit complex. But the two things that I would mention is, exhibit a collection of your work experience, because that sets the track record of what you're capable of accomplishing, and then showcase what you can bring to the table to the people that are being recruited, so that they understand what is the things that you can bring to their institution. Compensation model, you have to understand it. It's different with each individual institution. So you have to pretty much sit down with their, executive director and think about what's the model that the group works with. Is there any sign-on bonus? Do they, take care of some of your debt from medical school or residency? And what's the base pay and what's the incentive pay? If you have done so many cases, is there an incentive pay? Opportunity, is there an opportunity to renegotiate, moving down, or is this a fixed contract? Do they take care of some of the taxes, retirements, and non-compete clause? These are all the things one should understand at the time of recruitment. And some of the resources that, you can look into in order to understand what, how a person in similar position is being compensated, I would say, start very simple, easily done is online search. But there are other organizations that does put out a little bit more detailed version of it, which is the Medical Group Management Association. So does American Medical Group Association Compensation, AAMC. All these groups puts out what the what's the range of compensation is for, depending on whether you're in academics, community level, you're at assistant level, associate level, professor level, what's the 25th percentile, 75th percentile. So it's worth investing some time in looking through these resources. The bottom line is you have to familiarize with compensation with similar situation, talking to your colleagues, looking at all the resources that are there, and even talking to the person that has left the institution, what their pay was before. Pretty much you have to do your homework in order to understand what the compensation is going to be. Some of the common pitfalls is most often people don't negotiate. Why? It's fear, mostly because they fear that they may not be offered that position if they start negotiating. And for some reason, we go through almost 30 years of training. We have learned something in surgery. But when you sit at the negotiation table, you lose confidence. And most people feel like, what am I going to bring to the table, even though you have spent 30 years of your life, There is something you're going to bring to the table, and you just have to figure it out to verbalize it. And the third point I would say is not doing any research, especially new graduates, not looking through all the resources that I mentioned, looking at the history of the department, institution, what's the track record of the administrative leadership has been. These are some of, very critical mistakes, not doing that thorough research. And most importantly, reaching out to your own mentors and experienced senior colleagues. You should definitely reach out and talk to them about what the situation is at the institution that you are interested in, and is this good or not so good? These have to be discussed with your mentors and at least with your senior colleagues. And one of the things that we rarely do is talk to the person that has just recently left, that the position became vacant about. Why did they leave? Is there something that is not being very obviously discussed in your interview process? That person might give you more realistic picture of what's going on. So it's very important to reach back to that person who has recently left in order to understand the situation. And when you do get your contract, just don't blindly sign it. Have it reviewed with a third party. Yes, it is going to cost some money to have a lawyer look at it for a few hours and discuss it. It is definitely worth it. I've seen a lot of people, especially new graduates, who has just signed it because they are happy to get that position, and then later on found out that they cannot, practice 15 miles away from that institution, or they have to pay back certain things. It is not a pleasant situation to deal with. As he's leaving an institution would be a little bit sad, and to deal with this, it just doesn't leave a good taste in anybody's mouth. So it's important to have these things, reviewed beforehand, so that you can leave a place, if you have to leave, in a good way. And the last thing I want to say is sometimes we assume that if an institution or a department is recruiting us, well, they are going to provide for resources for our success. And that may not necessarily true, because they are looking for whether you can do the clinical job or not. But what are the other aspects if you are in an academic institution that you need to accomplish, So, and that you don't find out until like 3-4 years into your career. And by then you lost significant amount of time. So watch out for these things. When do you negotiate? Well, I think negotiation is not a unique concept to job search or recruitment. We do this every facet of your life. I wake up, even before I wake up, the night before, I'm thinking, what time do I need to wake up? I'm bargaining, okay? Can I wake up 10 minutes later, or do I need to get up at this time? Do I get my regular coffee or cappuccino? Do I take I-95 South or, 195 South? Do I do Roux-en-Y or sleep? We're always negotiating. Open Whipple, MIS Whipple, we're always negotiating. So why should it be any different when you are negotiating what the value that you bring to the mission and vision of the institution? It should happen at every level, even at your entrance level. There is something that you should be able to make sure that you have a solid contract so that everybody leaves a little bit happier at the end of the day. Some of the conclusions that I want to bring is the focus of negotiation should be what can you bring to the table for that department or for that institution or for that division, and how is it being compensated? And compensation could be material, personal, support, resources, conference calls, all those things come under compensation. And your golden opportunity is at the time of recruitment. After that, the ship has sailed pretty much. I mean, you can negotiate, but it's not going to be as effective when you do it at the time of your recruitment. And sit down and write out what is the worthiness, what is your professional worthiness, even if you're going for an entrance level position. There's something that uniquely that you can bring. Write those down so that you can discuss it in your contract negotiation and see if you can align your mission and vision with the department and institutions. And if I have to give you one word, is always in any situation, try to create a win-win situation, because nobody wants to be on the losing end at the end of the day. Everybody wants to win. So if you can creatively come up with creating a win-win situation, that would be ideal. And you can do that. I mean, you're very intelligent as a surgeon, you trained all your life. You can figure out, how can I create the situation where the department benefits and at the same time I can accomplish what my mission and vision for my career is. And the most common pitfall is not negotiating at all. A lot of us do it, even at higher levels of positions, we do that. So to that, I will say that's the end of my talk, and thank you.
Wow, thank you, ma'am. That was wonderful, especially on such a challenging topic. So much great insight, especially for someone like me, like a government employee that doesn't have experience with those sorts of things. I definitely appreciate you sharing all that information. Our next talk is going to be from Dr. Amir Fathi. He's going to be discussing academic or private practice, which is right for me. Dr. Fathi is a clinical associate professor of surgery at UCSF Fresno Medical Education Program. He is a board certified general surgeon from Case Western Reserve University at Cleveland, and has completed his fellowship training in hepatopancreatobiliary surgery at Medical College of Wisconsin. Dr. Fathi is a medical director for Oncology System of Care and Clovis Cancer Institute, as well as the chairman of Oncology Advisory Council for Community Medical Centers. And nationally, he serves as a surveyor for Commission on Cancer for American College of Surgeons. Dr. Fathi is the facility executive chair for Community Regional Medical Center, Central Valley of California's only safety net hospital. Dr. Fathi, thank you for joining us today. I sure appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd like to thank the chair of the committee, our moderator, our admin people, everyone who worked tirelessly to put this talk together. Are you seeing my thing okay? Everything coming up okay?
Yes, sir. It looks great.
Okay, very well. The question that I'm tasked to answer is academic or private practice. Which one is right for me? So we had two beautiful talks about how to look, when to look, and when you find that something, how to negotiate. Now I'm trying to tell you what are the different types of jobs available in the United States. If we want to divide whatever is available in the United States to categories, there would be three major categories: private practice, purely academic programs, and in between there are the hybrid programs. And I'm going to explain each of them and try to make it clear for you to be able to decide which one is the right for you. But before going to the different types of program, I really want to touch base on again on what Dr. Baker started with, and that is, where are you? What do you see yourself doing in the future? So the best thing is for all of us when we come out of the training is to sit down and really think about a short and midterm goals of that, which will go around 5 years. So where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And in order to answer that question, there are 5 major points. One is importance of money and financial implications. I mean, are you someone who really wants to achieve the financial independence and does the FIRE and all these new hype that is coming up and wants to retire in 5 years, 10 years, want to be completely independent in 10 years? Or no, money is not that important. Are you someone that you really need a lot of support, hand-holding, and when you start the career as an HPV surgeon, do you really want to be around 3 different senior people so you have that safety net that you can call them in whenever you're in trouble, or you're going to be able to figure it out? Where does research stand for you? Are you someone who are coming out, you have a laser-focused research opportunity, you really want to dive into the R01, KT grants, and you really want to have a lab? Or I had a co-fellow who really hated research. He was a great writer, but he did not want to do research at all. As Dr. Baker said, do you have any geographical restrictions? Do you have to be in a certain part of country because of your family or not? I did all my education in Midwest, and when I was done in Milwaukee, my wife was, we're going back to California or long distance dating, you choose. So I didn't have that much options, so I had to come back to California. And then you really have to really understand the importance of your significant others and family. I mean, you really need to have a heart-to-heart talk with your significant others. Our past 2 speakers very nicely told us about you, but what I will try to emphasize is your significant other as well. You really need to have a heart-to-heart talk with your significant other, with your family if you're really close to them, to see what their expectations from you. And then when you have all these talks, get a notepad down, and write just a good old notepad, write the pros and cons, and decide where you want to be, to have a realistic understanding of what are your wants and dreams, and then look at the jobs available to see what fits you. I would really recommend not to try to completely reinvent yourself or you reshape yourself for a job that doesn't fit your criteria, but you think it is the best job. I mean, I'll give you an example. If you're a surgeon with 3 kids and your significant other doesn't work and your family are in New York, taking a $225K job in San Francisco, no matter how great the job is going to make you miserable. So really try to know where you are, what you're doing, and find a job that fits your criteria, as our previous speaker said, rather than trying to reshape yourself. With that, I want you to look at the job opportunities in a different way. And that is whether you're going to be an owner or an employee. Right now, there are 4 different types of jobs in the United States. Either you're going to be an owner of a solo practice, you're going to come in, you're going to buy a practice, or you're going to take over a family practice, and you're going to be in charge of that practice. It is highly unlikely for a junior faculty, but that can happen. Or you're going to be a part owner of something that you're going to be part of the ups and downs of that practice. Or you're going to be an employee, either employee of practice, hospital, health system, or an academic institution. Either you can be an employee of the University of Michigan or Kaiser. You're basically an employee. This has a huge tax implications regarding your pays, how your pay is going to be structured. So after defining who you are, try to look into what type of job you want to be. Do you want to be an employee, not to deal with the nitty-gritty of running a practice, or you're okay, you have the background to be able to run a practice? With that, we will dive into different types of practices that are available right now. We'll start with private practice. AMA did a benchmark study in 2016. They haven't renewed it, but it's very relevant. And we all know, they just put this in numbers, that in 1980s, majority of the physicians, over 70% of the physicians, worked for other physicians. as time passes, less physicians are working for physicians, meaning that the true private practices are getting smaller and smaller. The numbers are decreasing. And interestingly, the younger people, they're not interested in joining a private practice or work for their peers. They'd rather be in an employee model and work for a big institution. This is a graph that shows the same thing. The orange line shows the hospital-owned practices, and the blue line is the physician-owned practices. As you can see, the physician-owned practices is declining because it's just becoming more and more difficult to deal with personnel, HR issues, hiring, firing, malpractice, putting together proposals for the insurance companies. It's just becoming more difficult. And people, again, it goes back to that life-work balance thing that people just want to work, take good care of their patients, go home and not to worry about anything. With that, we'll come to our private practices. There are two main types of private practice that you really need to understand which of them you're going into. One is, the first one is the physician-owned practice. 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 physicians, they come together, they work together, and they form a group. They share a call, they talk to the hospital, they work with the insurance companies, they hire, they fire, they have their own malpractice insurance. A group of people, a group of physicians running like a family business. The second one is the hospital or healthcare system owned practices. And this is the one that you're going to hear about, foundations or IPA models. It is really important, but so hospitals are not able to, majority of the states, hospitals or healthcare systems are not able to, for some litigation issues, they're not able to hire doctors directly. So they form these foundations or independent physician associations that physicians will be hired. But they keep these things at arm's distance, but eventually they're connected to that big pocket of the hospital. So it is not the actual 5 doctors working together and you eat what you kill. This is basically associated with the hospital that you can negotiate even better with them. So if you are going to private practice, truly try to first and foremost understand who's the ultimate boss. Who is in charge? Is this group of doctors and there's one senior guy that is making the calls, or actually you're connected to a healthcare system? And try to truly understand where the money is coming from, who is in charge of the money, who divides the money up. So these are one of the main things to learn about the private practices before we go into the other important stuff. So usually between those 3, this is going to have the highest amount of salary for you. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions. Use the MGMA. As Dr. Ayalou said, there are multiple resources. The most, at least I find the MGMA most user-friendly. There's some part of it is free, but then other parts you have to pay for it. Talk to your department wherever you are right now. They usually have an MGMA book. That's just like a Bible for hiring. It has all the comp data, RVU data, everything. Know where you stand. But the private model is going to have the highest salary. If you have more independence, no one is going to care when you're going, when you're coming, as long as you make the money that they want. You're on your own, basically, from the research and education opportunity standpoint. In these type of situations, the focus is patient care and finances. So if you're someone who wants to be a big researcher, usually this is not the right model for you. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is we all grow up in the academic setting. You're a resident and you are a fellow, you deal with your program director, with your chairman, and you think that is the world. As a matter of fact, there's another world that exists outside of your department. Hospitals have their own department of surgery. They have their own medical executive committee. There are multiple other meetings that are involved in the hospital. Sometimes your academic chair will be the hospital surgeon-in-chief or chairman, and sometimes it's not. If you're in private practice, there's a significant amount of growth opportunities within the hospital system, medical exec committees, a lot of other paid positions that you can be part of. So there's a lot of significant inter-system growth opportunities. They usually have very complex contracts. Be aware of the promissory notes. Sometimes they're going to ask you to sign a lot of promissory notes, just as Dr. Ayalou said. Get a lawyer to look at your contract. These contracts are very lengthy, and and have promissory notes associated with them. But usually they have good financial incentives because they want to add to their groups and know what type of insurances they're offering you. Know your malpractice insurance, know your health insurance, because they really differ between groups. More importantly, know your financial model. Ask them. Asking questions is okay. As Dr. Ailu said, part of that negotiation is asking questions. Ask them how are you going to get paid? Are you in a salary model? Are you killed, meaning that whatever you produce, you're going to keep it. You produce $1 million, it's yours. You produce $100,000, that's all you get. If you're an RVU based, ask them. Look at the MGMA book. Ask them what type of money associated with each RVU. But from the private practice standpoint, it's essential to understand the financial model that they're offering you. Then we'll go to the academic programs. This is the most rigid one. You can't negotiate that much. If you're getting hired by UCSF main campus or University of Michigan, they already have a set contract. It is usually a small contract. You can't change that much about it. They usually don't have that many promissory notes. And pretty much you're under the thumb of the chairman. Your chairman will be really mad if you go and start negotiating with the CEO of the hospital. In private practice, you can do whatever you want, but in the academic model, you have to truly go through the hierarchy. You need to talk to your chairman or vice chair or division chief for them to negotiate for you. You can't just pick up the phone and call CEO or be friends or go drinking with the CEO of the hospital. It's a rigid hierarchy, but it gives you a lot of opportunities. Usually you have great peer support. There are other people who can help you grow. Tremendous opportunities for research and education. Usually financial benefits are not that great because they're already offering it to tons of people. If you're in the University of Michigan, they have a set thing. Salary is going to be the lowest in terms of all the three models, and usually you get good insurance programs. And then the last one is the hybrid model. For example, the one that I'm in. Usually these are private practices with an academic exterior. What happens is when you say UCSF Fresno or Dr. Al-Haykas and Metro Health, which is part of the Case Western, these are usually these are the private practices that are going to hire you, but there's a university that is giving you an academic appointment to teach their trainees. UCSF is giving me an academic appointment to teach their residents, fellows, and students, but I'm not hired by UCSF, I'm hired by a private practice. So try to understand when you're going to these satellite university hospitals, you're going to the other health systems that are associated with the universities, know what you are dealing with. That your contract, your insurance, your everything is going to be different than the main campus. So names are going to sound the same, but beyond that exterior, everything is different. So you have to ask the same questions about the private practice from them. They usually have complex contracts as well. You can do some negotiation. You have education opportunities, but again, treat them like a private practice with a lot of leeway for you rather than a rigid academic model. And as all three of us said, look at the big picture. Don't get fooled with the very high salary that you're getting offered, because there could be a lot of other stuff that come and get you later on that you will regret your decision for moving all across the country. And it's not fun to leave your job 1 or 2 years after signing the contract. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I know that we're pushing the questions for the end, but I appreciate the opportunity from the chair of committee, our moderator, committee members, and we'll answer some questions at the end.
Dr. Fathi, thank you so much. That was excellent. Definitely have to always beware of the sharks. That is for sure. Our next speaker, I'm very excited to introduce, is Dr. Rebecca Minter. She is the A.R. Cureri Professor and Chair of the Department of Surgery at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. Previously, Dr. Minter held successive leadership roles in the University of Texas Southwestern and the University of Michigan, serving as the chief of hepatopancreatobiliary section division at both institutions. Dr. Minter's clinical practice is in the areas of pancreatobiliary and gastrointestinal surgery, and she has a particular interest in the management and treatment of benign and neoplastic diseases of the pancreas. Dr. Minter is recognized as a clinical leader in her field and is the past president of the Americas Hepatic Pancreatobiliary Association and is the current Diversity and Inclusion Officer of the International Hepatic Pancreatobiliary Association Education and Training Committee. Dr. Minter is joining us to talk about building one's career and overcoming imposter syndrome. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm having trouble sharing my screen. It says I can't share until somebody else stops sharing. So I don't know, Amir, if you can take your slides, if you can just hit that stop share.
I thought I did. I'm sorry. There you
go. Okay, perfect. Thanks. Now the hardest part of all of this, which is always sharing the screen. So let's see if I get it right. No, not working. There, can you see my slides?
Perfect, ma'am.
Okay, from my children to the slides. So my only disclosure this evening is that, for this topic, these are my thoughts and experiences because we all have had a different lived experience. And so I strongly encourage everyone to gather many perspectives on this. And there are many great people on this panel and in the committee, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts. But this is a topic that's great to continue to learn from others all along your career. So I thought I'd start with, how did I get here and what have I learned along the way, which has been a lot. And I think that, these may sound pat, but they're all very true. We all get where we are from hard work, determination, resilience, confidence, persistence, and willing to take risk. And you've heard some great talks already about important things to consider, but I think at the end of the day, you can be happy in a lot of different places. And it's really important that you're open to that and that you show up in this way and figure out how to be successful and plant and grow where you're planted, as they say. These things don't happen by accident, though. And I would say that I've had a lot of support along the way. I had support from my parents, especially my father. I've had people who've cared about me enough to give me feedback. And most importantly, I listened most of the time, not always. And I've had a lot of people who've sponsored me. And I think for all of us, as we go through this path, it's important to remember that we also have to pay it forward. And this is one of my favorite pictures of all time of my daughter at the HPBA meeting about 3 years ago when I was president, and she was walking by on the way to my presidential address, and my husband snapped this picture. My husband's also a surgeon, on the way there, because she was like, look, it's mama. And I think that we have to remember that people are always watching and learning, and as we support others, as others supported us, we really have to do that going forward. And that's one of the greatest joys of being in this profession. And I think it's really important to keep in mind. So I'm going to talk about these 7 suggestions, and I won't read them all here because I'm going to walk through each of them. But as I sat down and considered this, I think these really are the 7 things that I would recommend. And I was asked specifically to talk about imposter syndrome, but I think that's great because we all have some elements of imposter syndrome. And I'm going to walk through each one of these in a little deeper detail. So if we start at the top with actively combating imposter syndrome, I think it's important to note that imposter syndrome has a lot of manifestations. And again, it can be a little bit different and show up a little bit differently for each of us. So for some people, I think we traditionally think about it as this not putting yourself out there, not believing you can do the job, take the opportunity. But it also comes through in other ways, like trying too hard, always trying to prove your competence in every room you're in, not being able to say no or set appropriate boundaries, even when you're totally burned out because somehow you will not be respected or thought less of, and not having confidence in yourself. And as I went to learn more about imposter syndrome, I found this great rubric, which I love, which talks about the 5 different types of imposters. And I suspect that we all will fit into one or more of these categories, and I'll talk a bit more about them. So the 5 types of imposter syndrome really are the perfectionist. So this is the person who believes that if things are not 100% perfect, that somehow they failed to deliver, they are not worthy, if you will. The expert is the knowledge version of the perfectionist. So their primary concern is on having to know absolutely everything about everything. And if they don't, then again, somehow they are a failure. or they're not good enough. The soloist is the person who has to do everything themselves, or it won't be done right. And I think we've all been there at some point. This is something I'm certainly afflicted with. I've gotten better over time because I can't just do everything myself, but this definitely is prevalent, especially in surgeons, I think. The natural genius, I've never been afflicted with this one. I'm definitely not a natural genius. It feels like there are people who are, though. But there are people who feel like they should just be able to do everything with ease and speed. I've definitely been more of that hard worker, try harder than everybody else kind of overcompensator. And this is probably the one that describes me the most, which is this superwoman or Superman concept, which is you believe you have to do everything well. You have to be the perfect, parent, the perfect partner, the perfect hostess, the perfect, when your kids have to take stupid cupcakes to school, you have to make them yourselves and decorate them. It goes on, the list goes on, and then lay on top of that being perfect at work and the perfect surgeon, the perfect leader. It goes on, and it's exhausting. And so as I looked at this list, I definitely still suffer with the superwoman one as I try to balance all of the different roles I have gotten better at being a soloist simply out of survival and necessity. But I do find that when I get stressed, I think awareness of these different concepts is important. You tend to fall back into your base behaviors. So when I get stressed and I feel like something needs to get done, I'm just going to do it myself, which is of course the wrong answer and will only ensure that you will continue to do it yourself forever. So really important advice is be confident and fake it until you make it, which is really relevant when you're a young faculty member. And I'll just share a brief story from when I was a third-year resident. I had just gone into the lab. I was a resident at the University of Florida, and Tim Eberlein came to give a visiting professor talk. And, he gave, I'm sure it was very inspirational. I don't even remember anymore exactly what the talk was about, but I do remember this vividly, that at the end I had a question and I sat there just like terrified to ask the question. I finally raised my hand and I started my question by, I'm sure you said this. I'm sorry, I must have missed it. I may not understand. And then I asked my question. And at the end of that grand rounds, my chair at the time, it was Ted Copeland, came after me, and he's always been incredibly supportive of me my whole career. But this is perhaps the thing I remember from him most. And he said, Rebecca, he's like, I thought I was in big trouble because he was clearly upset. And he's like, Rebecca, I never, ever, ever want to hear you ask a question like that. You probably know 10 times more about what you were asking about than he does. And you need to ask questions with confidence. And I will never, ever forget that because he was right. I apologized 10 times before I asked my question. And in fact, I probably did know more about that particular thing because I was brave enough to raise my hand. So I think, you have to just pretend sometimes, even when you don't feel confident, but being confident and pretending you're confident, at least until you are, is important, especially as you start your career. And sometimes just pretending gives you confidence. So confidence does not equal arrogance. And it's important with balancing being confident or pretending to be confident with not having to be the smartest person in the room. Being humble and confident is important. But at the same time, don't downplay your accomplishments. Don't minimize yourself in the ways that I just gave an example of. When you're at meetings, introduce yourself. As Dr. Baker said, I actually met Dr. Baker in the bar at an AHPBA meeting when she was a fellow. So that advice is good. And ask thoughtful questions at meetings. Stand up to the microphone, introduce yourself, say who you are, and ask a smart question. And believe that your question is smart. That is a great way to, again, become noticed and to meet people. As Sheryl Sandberg has said, lean in. And I think this is true, not just for women, but men as well, but sit at the table, engage, raise your hand, ask for opportunities, and don't shy away from opportunities. We hear all about over and over how to say no, how to say no. I'd encourage you to say yes. Not 100% of the time, but more often than you say no. And 80% of success, it's true, is showing up. If you show up and you do a good job, I learned this from Mike Sarr. He's like, just show up and be on the committee and do a good job and do the work, and you'll be better than 80% of the people on the committee. And he's, again, right. There's a lot of people who sign up for things, but don't show up and do the work. So be engaged, show up, do the work. Consider how you show up. You know, be positive. Nobody likes a Debbie or a Douglas Downer. And, you know, try to have the glass half full approach to things, even if you're a glass half empty kind of person at baseline. And my husband and I laugh because he's definitely more of the half empty type and I'm more of the half full type. But even he has learned to be more half full at work. So I think it's really important to come with a positive attitude. Don't be too rigid. You know, we learn to do things very specific ways. That's how we've been successful over time. Be open to new ways of doing things, especially if you're going to a new place with a new job. It's one of the most exciting things about taking on a new job. And especially when you first come out of training, you think there's one right way to do things. The reality is that is simply not true. And one of the great things about going to a new place is all the new things that you will learn from others if you're open to them. I'm sure you've heard this one before, bring solutions rather than just all the problems. It's helpful, even if your solution isn't the one you go with, it's helpful to come with some solutions because it shows that you're open to solving things rather than just complaining about them. And I think that try to avoid this being a victim or constantly, it's not fair. And this is not meant at all to not to elevate things that aren't real equity issues like inequitable compensation frameworks or anything like that. But this is the going around constantly of, you know, the world is out to get me and it's not fair. That's not fair. As I tell my kids all the time, guess what? Life's not fair. Move on. Be resilient. So, you know, when you're going to raise this voice, which is an important one, make sure you haven't cried wolf and said it every single time and really save it for those important issues where it really matters and where attention needs to be drawn. This is my middle son's favorite shirt, and it is true. The struggle is real, and I think that you have to make it clear to others. Again, the superwoman side of me, I had to learn that, like, actually, it's good to show that I struggle with all the same things everybody else struggles with. I struggle with being a wife, being a mother, being a surgeon, being a chair of a large department. You name it. It's a lot, and I don't do it perfectly. And so I think it's actually really important to make it visible, to others, especially our junior faculty who are like, God, how do you do all of that? And I'm like, I don't do it all well, and I have a lot of help. When I leave to take my kids to the pediatrician, I tell everyone in the hallway who will listen, going to the doctor, going to this thing for my kids, I'm doing that. I'll tell the custodial person, because it's important that they see that I do that so that they know that they should do that. And so I think we have to make these struggles more visible rather than trying to bury them and hide them, because that's how you figure out how to have work-life integration, because I don't think work-life balance exists. It's just a continuous series of integration. Build your community. This is some of my favorite friends from the HPBA before, COVID hit, but, find your friends. Your professional societies will bring you tremendous joy, and you will make lifelong friendships. And these folks provide you with tremendous, tremendous support. And so I encourage you to take advantage of those relationships and that supportive environment. Importantly, allies and confidants are different. You need them both, but understand the difference. Allies really are people at work who will be aligned with you and will help you move initiatives forward, maybe building a new program that you're interested in. Confidants are those people who you can really and truly trust and have open conversations with and brainstorm with. And we have a tremendous group of chairs here, males and females, but we have a group chat of the bossy female chairs, as we have named ourselves. And this is my favorite group chat. We can be in a boardroom and everybody's like, are you kidding me? And, it's just a group of people that you can be totally safe with, and finding those folks is really critical and makes your work life so much more fun. Become an excellent communicator. Importantly, most people cannot read minds. I had to learn this in my marriage. Most people cannot read minds, and we assume that people know a lot of things they don't. Try to resist creating your own narrative. In general, what we come up with is 100% wrong. and usually a lot worse than reality. When you start doing that, go and have a conversation with the person for whom you're creating the narrative in your head and get the real story. Watch body language. We don't have enough in-person meetings anymore. It's one of the greatest problems with all the virtual world we have, but learn to read the room, learn to where there's resistance, where your supporters are in the room, and change your tact, change your direction if you see that things aren't going well. These are two of my favorite tools that are really important. This is a particularly good tool for the expert, if you will, who needs to know everything, imposter. The 5 whys are trying to get to a root cause of a problem. Well, why do we do it this way? And then you go to the next level. Why do we, well, why do we do that? And then why? Pretty soon you get down to something often that is the real problem for why we don't do something. You just keep going a layer deeper. This concept of humble inquiry is really this seek to understand. Don't come with an assumption of guilt, assume best intent, and come to a conversation with a desire to learn rather than with an assumption. Build your networks. This is a key for the soloist. We are all much more effective, especially as we move up, through the people that we support, through the people that support us, and through the connections that we make. Being a connector and an influencer, we all lead by influence these days. Everybody has a boss. My kids are like, Mom, you have a boss? I'm like, I have several bosses. We all have bosses. We don't lead by command and control. We lead by influence. And this is true at every level. And as you help others and support others and connect with others and become that connector, you will have support in rooms that you don't even know you have support in going forward. So it's how you will amplify your success. You don't have to be the soloist. So lastly, and most importantly, and I think you've heard this from all of the talks, you have to know yourself, know thyself, and be true to thyself. You need to know what your core values are, and you need to stick with them. Make decisions based on those core values, even if people disagree with them, as long as they understand why you made the decision and you're consistent in that decision making, people will respect you. You have to have high integrity in everything you do. And if you do have that, even if you make a wrong decision, if you made it for the right reason, it's fine. So always do the right thing. And that could be the right thing for your family, the right thing for your patient, the right thing for your partners. As long as you do that, you will be fine. So those are my 7 suggestions. And I know we're running into time, so I will close and look forward to the end for questions.
Thank you, ma'am. That was wonderful. Very inspiring. So for our last speaker, last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Kevin L. Hayek. Give me 1 second here. Dr. L. Hayek is married with 2 daughters and a son and lives just outside Cleveland, Ohio. He is the head of the endoscopic surgery and hepatopancreatobiliary surgery sections at the Metro Health System in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. L. Hayek completed his undergraduate degree at Harvard University and received his MD from Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in 2006. He went on to complete a general surgery residency, followed by clinical fellowships in minimally invasive surgery, endoscopic surgery, and HPB surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. In 2014, he moved to Abu Dhabi to help launch the Digestive Disease Institute at Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi. He returned to Cleveland in 2016 and was the Associate Program Director of the HPB Surgery Fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic from 2017 to 18, and the Program Director from 2018 to 19. Dr. L. Hayek is currently an Associate Professor of Surgery at Case Western Reserve University and a Clinical Associate Professor of Surgery at Northeast Ohio Medical University. His clinical and research interests include endoscopic surgery, minimally invasive foregut, and HPB surgery. And Dr. L. Hayek, thank you so much for participating with us today.
Well, thank you, Daniel and SAGES for putting on this great webinar. It's an honor to be part of this panel of skilled HPB surgeons and friends. So by now, we've all received the pearls of wisdom from these experts on how to interview and find the perfect job, how to thrive as a junior partner, negotiating our worth, finding that academic versus private practice, and building your career. And there's so much effort that goes into that process. And I think many hopefully are settled where you are, and that's great. But there may be, just maybe, some of you who are wondering what it might be like to change. And as you're driving into work, the following iconic lyrics may be playing in your head. Should I stay or should I go now? If I go, there will be trouble. And if I stay, it will be double. Now, a quick fun fact about this song to start off that was written by The Clash in 1981. It was the band's only single, #1 single in the UK charts a full decade after it was released. So if we listen to this sage advice, assuming that trouble will be double, if we stay, the obvious answer is that we should go. So that's actually it. That's my talk. I'm done. And we'll take questions. No, I'm kidding. Kidding aside, I think there's a lot of issues to ponder if you're considering a move, and based on the fact that I've recently done it, I'll just share some wisdom that I can from the experience. I know that it's going to be very personal for everyone, as many of these talks are. But I think there's some general concepts that I've learned either experientially or vicariously through going through this process. So not surprisingly, my talk is broke up into 2 sections, because really I think there's tremendous value in asking that question, either should I stay or should I go? Now, before I jump into the meat of the talk, I'll walk you through a little bit of my journey that Daniel talked about. So I started with my Cleveland Clinic journey as a resident in 2006 to 2011. I then stayed on for clinical fellowships, first in endoscopic surgery, advanced laparoscopy, followed by HPB in 2012 and 2013. And I'll pause here because I think what happened at that time, especially as I was going through the first fellowship, was there were a number of MIS bariatric positions that were available. And I was actually counseled by many to consider foregoing second fellowship and, just get a job, start working. And I actually considered doing that, but my heart was in HPB, and I really wanted to get that skill set, even if there wasn't an immediate HPB job on the horizon. And while I loved HPB, it was really what I loved doing. I actually also enjoyed MIS and foregut and endoscopy and many of the fields that I was exposed to in my residency and fellowship. So I was actually okay if I didn't get a pure HPB job, which many of you know is actually almost impossible to find anyway. So after brief consideration of applying to a number of jobs after that first fellowship, I held off from going into real life, and I went back to training and did HPB fellowship. And during that fellowship, it was pretty clear, listen, there's not going to be a post here. We're very saturated with HPB jobs. And I went through that job process highlighted by Dr. Baker, where I explored a number of options. I was offered, a couple positions, general surgery that had some HPB options. But at the end, I was actually offered a position to stay predominantly in the MIS, foregut, and endoscopic surgery practice at the Cleveland Clinic, which I did from 2013 to 2014. But what I would do is I would be kind of rolled into the HPB call schedule to help with building my HPB practice. So from those, in that year, my practice was probably about 80% MIS, foregut, endoscopic surgery, and about 20% HPB. In fact, I joked that the H in HPB stood for hernia at the time, but honestly, that was fine. And it was great. I was very happy. And around that time, there was a unique opportunity to become part of the founding team of the Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. And I was developing a growing practice at the clinic, and the opportunity was just really unique. And I wasn't sure there was going to be something that presented itself like that again. So I jumped on it. And in 2014, I moved to Abu Dhabi, and it was a very hard decision to leave. But I remember talking to Phil Schauer about it as I was preparing to leave. And he said, what do you plan to do there? And I said, well, Phil, I'm going to go to the Gulf, and I'm going to build a world-class MIS and HPB practice, hopefully introducing that part of the world to what we do here at Cleveland Clinic. And I'll never forget his response, which really rings true for anyone who's about to take a job anywhere. And he said, well, Kevin, let me tell you what I think you're going to be doing. You're going to be serving the needs of the people in the community. And I didn't really know what he meant at that time, but by the time I got there and I realized as a young surgeon trying to build a complex HPV oncology practice that I actually wasn't doing much HPV at all. In fact, most of my practice was bariatrics, about 90%. And since I was trained in that, I could easily step into it, but it wasn't exactly, as you know, where my heart was. So I returned to the main campus in 2017, and over the next 2.5 years, built up an MIS robotic program, and the HPV section changed significantly, and was able to really build that and even help with the fellowship. But obviously, we'll take a pause here, and this is when those words were singing in my head, and I started to ask that question: should I stay? And ultimately, I left, and just kind of talking through, what it means to stay. So should I stay? I think first I would say that there's a huge value in staying in one spot. And I think there are many of us who've seen teachers along the way who fit this bill, but I have to highlight one, and that's actually my father, Salim El Hayek. He moved from the United States from France via Lebanon in the 1970s when it was not safe to return to his home country. And he landed in a small community of Youngstown, Ohio in 1976, and he did his residency there from 1977 to 82. And after finishing residency, he started a solo private general surgery practice. And he is still in that practice full-time 44 years later, still rounding at the same hospital as a full-time general surgeon. And whenever I go back, I'm constantly reminded of the impact that he made on that community, continues to make, and how valuable his practice has been to his patients. And that gets back to that comment of Phil Schauer when I was leaving for Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. Where you go, wherever you set up shop, your primary responsibility is to serve the needs of those in the community. And the examples don't stop with my father. I think in both systems, Cleveland Clinic and Metro Health, there are a number of surgeons who either started and are still there or have retired from that one system. And I think there's no doubt that this is a great situation on many levels, not the least of which is your ability to devote your energy to a community, to a training program in many respects, so that you can develop the next generation of surgeons. And I would have to say that my goal in taking that first job was to be one of those long-term surgeons. But as I progressed, it became clear that I needed to change. And change is hard. But sometimes it's needed to take a step forward toward fulfilling your goals and potentially achieving goals both at home and in work. So as I mentioned, it's a very personal decision, and I'm sure it might be tempting to send, as you're considering, send your boss a card that says, I'm sorry for your loss. It's me. I'm leaving in 2 weeks, but maybe hold off on writing that card. And I'm happy to discuss my reasons, offline, or if someone wants to reach out. But let's go ahead and move into some tips. And I promise I didn't talk to Dr. Minter about these, but I have 7 tips as well. So I think that's the number of the night. So the first tip is don't make any decisions in anger. HPV surgery is stressful and arguably the most complex of all surgical subspecialties. I know I'm unbiased in that opinion. But if you're doing it, you're undoubtedly going to have some poor patient outcomes that create tension within your department. You will be challenged by more senior surgeons that may get you angry. I think it would be wise to hold off on making any decisions during anger, cool off, get over that acute event, and kind of take stock of how things are. And obviously, if this is a constant state, if you're constantly angry, I think it's probably a time for at least a consideration to move, but the more you can email the decision in that state, the better. This next point should be obvious, and Dr. Baker talked about it a little bit. Email is great, social media is great, but for when you're in kind of more tense things like potentially moving, trying to not misuse email and social media is very important. I know it's not particularly cool, but probably the best platform to use when discussing a potential move is either #IRL, face-to-face, or telephone. This always applies to point number 1 as well regarding anger. I haven't always followed this advice, but it almost always came back to bite me when I didn't. And I would say that periods of anger are best spent in the gym, punching a bag, and not in your office, punching the keyboard. So just, again, following up on that first point. The next is that if you're considering leaving, there's probably some conflict that you're facing with your colleagues. And I think to the extent that it's possible, I would recommend that you try to make things right in your current place of work. The surgical community is small. It gets even smaller when you consider HPB subspecialty. And even if you're getting very close to a decision to leave, you should almost be working extra hard to make things right, if not harmonious, in your current place of work. I once heard the following quote, which I think is applicable here. If you're leaving, people should ask, why is he leaving, and not when is he leaving? So anyone who's considering leaving is also likely experiencing a disconnect between what they were expecting, which probably was outlined in the recruiting process, but perhaps you didn't read the contract like I did, like Dr. Ailu mentioned, and what you're experiencing. But most of you will have some kind of annual performance review process. And I think it's very important to be clear about what your expectations are, and also to give your group some time. And the bigger the group, I think the more complex some of those requests may be. You need to give them some time to address your requests. And at the same time, I think it's important to leave a time limit on that. And so it's probably more than weeks, but less than years. If years are passing and that disconnect still exists, I think a leave is probable. This next point was brought up before, and I can't stress this enough. Find a coach. And I think it's important to define coach. There's been a huge focus on mentorship along our journey, and we've all had mentors along the way, but coaching is kind of a relatively newer phenomenon that's emerging within our field. And while mentors may help you within your field to give you specific clinical advice and various advice maybe within your direct groups, a coach is someone actually that helps you figure out what you want out of your profession, what you want out of your personal life. And they're almost always at least outside your immediate field, and sometimes outside of medicine altogether. But I would really direct your attention to, there's some real great work by Richard Boyatzis, Melvin Smith, and their group, also from Case Western University, on coaching and developing and finding executive coaches that can help you with figuring out what your vision, your mission is. Tip 6 is really to try the best of your ability to visualize your next 10, 20, 30 years. Now, there's no doubt that these things change, and this is a bit of an exercise, but it's an exercise that I think my military colleagues will know well. At both the AHPBA and SAGES meetings in the last few months, General James Stockdale was discussed, and he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam from 1965 to 1973. And when he was being interviewed years later about how he survived and others did not, he responded that they didn't survive because, he said, oh yeah, that's easy. They were the optimists. They were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say we'd be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart. And this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And this became known as the Stockdale paradox, where you simultaneously hang on to the vision of what you want, as well as the reality of the situation you're in. And I don't want to disrespect our armed forces by trying to equate a tough work situation with being a prisoner of war in Vietnam, but I think it's an important principle, and it's helpful if you're going through a tough time and you're trying to figure out if this is the right place for you. So above all, tip 7 is you got to make your decision. And this last piece of advice came from a coach that I was blessed to have while going through this journey, who was John Mellinger. And Dr. Mellinger was in the midst of receiving training to be an executive coach, so he was able to apply some of his lessons to my current decision. And as I neared the final decision, he told me a story about a rabbit in the middle of the road. And since I'm from Northeast Ohio, I've taken the liberty to convert this rabbit to a squirrel, which we are seeing a lot of these days. So you're the squirrel in the middle of the road, and you have a choice to stay, which is one side, or go, which is the other. As the car is approaching, you have to make a decision. When you make it definitively. Don't go back and forth or you're going to get hit. And the person who shared that analogy with him was actually a counselor for businessmen who were contemplating mid-career moves. And he kept tabs of the one and he followed up and he got some data and he found that ultimately those who left were almost uniformly happy with their decision years later. And that just gets back to our Clash song. And I'm happy to say that that's where I stand 2 years into that decision. But and I hope if that's what you decide to do, that would be your situation as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan for the discussion. I thank you for your attention.
That was great, sir. Thank you so much. So we do have a few questions from Facebook. The first one comes from Dr. Tamara Floyd. She wanted to know if the panelists had any advice on how a new HPV surgeon can go about convincing, say, a community program into to invest in a development of an HPV program. How do they get the equipment they need and show that value to those programs?
So if you want, I can jump it. I mean, sometimes when you're, Subhashini brought this up, like when you're starting, you kind of don't necessarily know what you need, especially if you end up staying. But as you go, you start to learn, there's certain non-negotiables. Like there were certain retractors, certain equipment, and that stuff happens on the recruitment end. So you really have to lay it out because that's when your power is strongest. If you wait and you get there and you start asking, the process is much longer.
I echo that. I mean, if you're thinking about creating a program, please make sure that there is, first of all, a niche for it, that you do have patients that you can serve, number one. Number two, if there's no equipment and all those things, then you're not going to be that successful after you get there. So you have to make sure you make a list of the things that you need, the resources, and give it to whoever is hiring you and see if they would be able to provide you with that, or at least reasonable requests should be granted before you start the program. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful without the support, the resources. And if you don't have, quite frankly, patients, if patients are going to a different town and you really don't have a patient volume here, you're not going to be able to provide your services.
I would just say something. I'm in a community practice like thing. So if that's after hiring and you want to start a program, it's all in community programs. It's all about return of investments. You got to show them that you have the volume. You got to get the marketing department to run numbers for you. Community hospitals can tell. There are specific softwares that they can tell who's referring where and what volume is referred where. This is different than academic programs. So meet with them, let them run a report, see how many liver patients are there, how many pancreas patients are there, how many % of your volume is getting referred outside of your system. So it's all about numbers. There are business people who are in charge. You got to show the volume. You got to show them that if they buy you the equipment, there's going to be return on their investment. That is the best way to go after you're hiring. So after what Dr. Al-Hayek and Dr. understand.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Maybe we can go through each one of the panelists, starting with Dr. Ayloo. Another question is, any additional insights, since we don't have Dr. Baker with us, about the job hunt? Any specific unique challenges that you experienced, or maybe a factor that you thought was key to finding that first job?
Sure. So most of you know that I've been an MIS surgeon, and then I did a dual fellowship with liver transplant and HPV because my goal was to create an MIS HPV, period. And I couldn't visualize doing open surgeries for these. So when you have something like that with very specific mission and vision, maybe not all the programs are going to be open for that, or there may not be any position open at the time you're looking for. So the one thing that I did was to reach out to different departments with my intent letter of what, I can bring to the table and what I would like to create, and see if there was an interest. And that is a long process. So you should get started at the time that, you're most probably anticipating, because it does take. And sometimes, even though there may not be a position open at the time that you are sending out your letter of intent, but they might have you on their mind. And who knows, the scenarios always change at the institutions, and they might think about your letter of intent of what you wanted to, and then may actually reach out to you. So I didn't look for any advertised positions. I actually sent out to the institutions that I was really interested in with a letter of intent. It was the other way around.
Dr. Fathi, any thoughts?
For me personally, it was geographical. I mean, my wife wanted to come back to California, and then there weren't that many HPV jobs, as Dr. Hayek said, in California. So that will fit what I wanted to do. And we were lucky that we found this job in Fresno. My wife found a job in Fresno State, local university, and I found this job. So it worked out well. So again, knowing what you are and try to what fits you.
And a little bit of luck, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Minter, any key factors for you when you found your first job?
The story about my first job is, I was the fellow's wife when I got my first job. And I think it gets back to this, idea of you take the opportunity, you prioritize the right things. My husband and I have been half the call schedule for, 7 years, 5 years clinical, I guess. And he was doing a vascular surgery fellowship. I wanted to stay married, and we thought, living apart for then another 2 years was not likely to have that outcome. And so that was our priority. And I had absolutely no leverage. So I actually initially was hired as a clinical instructor at the VA, and I teased Dr. Mulholland all the time that I ended up costing him a whole lot more money later, because I actually knew what to ask for 9 months later when they asked me to come onto the faculty officially. And then we stayed at Michigan for 12 years. So, but I had no resources when I went there for my lab or for anything else. And I had sponsors and mentors from Florida who connected me with folks. People supported me. As I've tried to do for others since, but, you have to decide what your priorities are. And it's far better to land in a place with a good culture. The rest will come. And, we have these ideas of a perfect first job. When you're coming out of residency or fellowship, you have a fixed deadline by when you need to have a job. And everybody thinks there's going to be this perfect job that ticks every single box. And the reality is that's not the case usually. But if you go to a place where you look for the opportunities and you do a good job, the opportunities will come. So I think really focusing on what's most important, your family, staying married, I would say have to be, number one on that list. And then the culture should be number two right behind it. So, because if you can find a good place with good people, you will be successful. And the other important thing to remember about your first job is, yes, while you don't want to leave 1 to 2 years later because it's terrible, you also don't have to stay there forever. And most people won't. So find a place that's going to get you launched and be supportive, and it will go from there. But when you show up, just show up and say, you know what, I'm going to do a great job and I'm going to be successful. And the rest will follow.
It's wonderful. Dr. El-Hayek, specifically for you, Dr. Raneem Al-Saad wanted to know, given your father's experience with setting up shop in one space for a long period of time to impact that community, what was your key factor for where you decided to set up shop? And also to follow up on that, what are you telling HPV fellows that are having some fear of not being able to find an HPV job?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of it when everyone was talking, I was thinking of myself going through all these journeys, like Amir talking about writing. I hated writing. I couldn't stand it, but I caught the bug in one of my fellowship years, and I was like, oh, actually, I like this, and so I hated it to start, and then I started liking it, and I realized like that was the one thing that doing private was going to be hard to do. And my dad said that too. He's like, there's no way I can write. He would have been a great writer, I think, but when you have your own private practice, you're running a business, you're solo, there's just no way. I liked also the subspecialty complexity. So I knew that I wasn't going to do what he did as much as it was, inspiring to me. I knew pretty much in my 5th year, I was like, no way I'm doing subspecialty surgery. And I just kind of saw the way things were moving. And so that's why I decided to go with the place I went. And then in terms of what I tell HPB fellows is really, again, like what many people have said is there's so much fear, I think, because you want to find this perfect thing, and it's okay to, get as much information you can, and you make the best guess that you can make. It's a guess. At the end of the day, it's a guess. You do your best, and you try to just get better, enjoy the day that you have. I had 2 goals wherever I was: get better myself and try to make the place better. So if you can do that each day, you're going to continue to make progress and things will fall into place. And again, there was a huge fear to leave. There's always a fear that if I leave, I'm going to lose everything that I built. But there's plenty of examples of people who have done great things in one spot and decided to go. So like Dr. Minter just said, like, you're not, the days of having to kind of commit to a community for 44 years, like my dad has done and still doing, is just, they're not here anymore. So
I also want to add that there, when you're a fellow and looking, or even a resident looking for a job, there's, monstrous amount of fear. Oh my God, where am I going to land? Am I going to be able to do the procedures? But you have to remember, you trained all your life for this. Okay. There's going to be a little bit of fear, but don't let the fear hold you back. Even if you don't immediately have a position right after coming from the residency or fellowship, it's okay, because people in the leadership position didn't find a perfect place either. So even if there is a gap, they will understand when you explain that, I didn't work last 3 months because I was trying to locate a job that is good for me. They will understand that. So, don't let fear stop you from advancing.
Excellent. So out of respect for everyone's time, I wanted to ask one more question from the panel. Dr. Minter had to run, but it was in regard to a portion of her talk. She talked a little bit about the work-life balance. And anytime we talk about that, I always kind of think of the end of Tombstone when Wyatt Earp is talking to Doc Holliday, and Doc Holliday asks Wyatt Earp, well, what did he want out of life? And Wyatt Earp answers, he just wanted a normal life. And Doc Holliday answers, there is no normal life, Wyatt, just get on with it. So how do you 3 deal with, work-life balance and the challenges of building your career at the same time as those obligations? Dr. El-Hayek, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a very timely question. I got a text from my wife earlier today about struggling with that very thing, and my response was, balance is a moving target. And I agree. I think this concept of being able to kind of achieve it and sort of be living in balance is probably a faulty way of looking at it. I think there's going to be periods of extreme imbalance in what we do. And we figure out ways to manage it, to mitigate it. But at the end of it, you do the best that you can, and there will, you ride the wave. Sometimes you'll feel very, very balanced. You love that. And then there's other times that you feel, okay, this is really not a great situation. And many times in that, it has to do with a patient outcome. Unfortunately, if someone has a bad outcome or you got a patient that's struggling, and it takes a lot out of us, and we bring that home with us. And I think it's trying to figure out a way to integrate it, I think is what Dr. Minter said, really not looking at it like we have to be juggling a bunch of things, but just integrating it, getting the most out of it that we can.
Excellent. Dr. Fathi, any thoughts about work-life balance?
As Kevin said, I think that it is a very moving target at different stages of life. I mean, I think that balance completely looks different for Dr. Minter compared to where I am or you are, and the stuff that she tries to juggle to get the balance compared to what I do. I think in different stages of life, in different situations, like if there is a move ahead of you, you want to move, quit a job, go to another job, that definition really changes. I think for a younger or mid-career people, the best thing is to define that for themselves. I think more important than the balance for the younger people is the definition of the balance is the definition of burnout. As long as we don't burn out, or you don't burn yourself down to the ground, in certain stages of life, that balance is going to be different. In earlier stages, you want to work as much as you can, make as much money as you can, operate as much as you can, write as many papers as you can. In the later stages, you get to a point that you hit the cruise control in a stable department. So I think it's a moving target, as Kevin said. We just need to define it for ourselves, be aware of burnout, and keep pushing.
That's excellent. Excellent advice. Dr. Ayaloo, any final thoughts?
I was terrible early in my career, to be quite honest with you. I don't think I could give an advice on that balance thing. I was trying to meet the criteria of academic, surgeon and did very poorly. But what I will tell you is it's very important to have, I'm going to say family, but family could be anybody, right? But that can support you through ups and downs and be there for you when you don't have the outcomes that you expected, or, so find that group of people. It could be family, friends, your significant, anybody. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you, it also is important in the department or the place that you are in, because if you have a good support there, you may not have to invest yourself or do extra in order to survive at that place. But if you don't have that resources, then it's going to come from some pot. It has to balance itself out. So again, find what is important for you. It's important to have personal life along with your academic or even a community career. Then try to negotiate what goes. And sometimes it could be a daily negotiation, what's is important for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to spend the Wednesday evening with me. I hope that the HPB audience, enjoys this as much as I did. The live stream will be available on the SAGES HPB Facebook group for the foreseeable future. And so people can go back and watch talks and take notes. And feel free to leave questions. The panelists can check it at any time and answer questions directly to them. So again, thank you all very much for taking the time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
See you guys.
Bye, Kevin. Bye, Anne.